Thank you for joining Wars of the Rosies as we conclude with part 16, the Robinsonaden, from Orders of Universal Reformation by Manly P. Hall. The Robinsonaden, a type of literature called the Robinsonaden, made its appearance in the early years of the 18th century. The first concrete example of this literary trend was Defoe's Robinson Crusoe. Other outstanding works of this class include the one seen on your screen. As a result of shipwreck, one or more persons are cast upon an uninhabited island. The gradual improvement of themselves and adjustment to the new and solitary environment are the outstanding features of these utopias. The internal pressure towards individuality, which was building up in the human subconscious, was introduced for public consideration by such works as Robinson Crusoe. Although generally attributed to Daniel Defoe, there are some reasonable doubts about the true authorship. Certain material originated in the adventures of Alexander, who had given his diary and related papers to Defoe. Beneath the factual incidents, however, is a powerful psychological summary of the human being confronted with the problem of organizing himself and creating a way of life on a remote island in the midst of a vast sea. Crusoe is impelled to go forth adventuring to escape from the pressure of old traditions. In his quest for fame and fortune, he finds himself alone, an experience common to all original thinkers. First, he longs for the companionship of others, but finally resigns himself to the sober task of putting his own little island in order and seeking contentment and security within himself. The philosophic implications of the story of Robinson Crusoe are enormous, but receive scanty considerations from the average reader. The hero is modern man attacking the problems of physical existence on a little island, which represents the planet Earth itself. Here, isolated in the sea of space, the castaway must build everything that he needs and protect himself from all natural hazards by his own skills and patience. Discouraged of receiving outside assistance, that is, of being rescued by the facilities of conventional society, he must face all responsibilities alone, accomplishing for himself all that is necessary for the survival of himself. The success of the book Robinson Crusoe was immediate, and it ran through 4 editions in 4 months. This could mean only that the popular mind was drifting on the tide of social pressures towards the concept of self-reliance. Man was no longer satisfied to be the victim of his world and its dominant trends. He sensed the possibility of attaining victory over circumstances by the integration of his own personality. In substance, he was heading towards rugged individualism. At the same time, most were aware of the magnitude of the undertaking which intrigued their minds. They had to build up a new world, opposed at every step by vested authority. Only those who could find some internal strength could hope to survive the pressure imposed by environment. After Robinson Crusoe had received wide approval as a book of the New Age by those who could read between the lines, several other works appeared attacking the basic problem from different viewpoints. These together constitute what is called the Robinsonaden cycle. All the utopias are efforts towards the crystallization of the concept of the philosophic empire. The wise man's city, ruled over by the philosopher king, is the heroic estate of man himself. Here, beneath heaven and earth, the human being must create his proper and natural abode. The physical world is insufficient to meet the requirements of unfolding consciousness, and the spiritual spheres are too distant and exalted to be accepted to the average mortal. Instinctively, man aspires to create a middle ground free from excess and extreme wherein to fashion his perfect way of life. All the islands of the Robinsonaden are havens for those who have drifted long and hopelessly in the sea of despair. Islands are the peaks of submerged mountains, and they represent in the romantic fables spheres of spiritual security. In each case, salvation is an escape to a higher level of consciousness. The principal difference between the 17th century Utopias and the 18th century Robinsonaden lies in the condition of the land where the castaway finds refuge. In the older cycle, the adventurer discovers a well-organized society which excites his respect and even veneration. The philosopher's city already existed somewhere as a model state. This harps back to Plato's doctrine of archetypes or patterns, but the later cycle is Aristotelian. The island is uninhabited, an earthly paradise which the deceits of men have not corrupted. Here the survivor must create his own utopia and unfold his own convictions. The drift towards materialism or naturalism as a psychological force becomes apparent. The human mind, struggling to escape from the pressures of traditionalism, rejected the past in toto, the good with the bad. There was no plan of life until man made his own. It was necessary to emphasize this point, for it was the key to the emergence of the dominant conviction of the modern human being. The idealist was not a prodigal son returning repentantly to his father's house, but a disillusioned wanderer resolved to find some quiet spot and build a house of his own. The 18th century Ulysses had most of the adventures of the ancient Greek hero, but he lacked the motivation upon which Homer's Odyssey was built, that is, the long journey back to the far distant native land. The 18th century intellectual was spiritually homeless. He had no desire to return to that which he had left behind. It was this rejection of the spiritual homeland, with all its implications, as the motivation for the journey of life that resulted finally in the modern age of desperate material enterprise. The Robinsonaden expounds two solutions to the dilemma of the cultural shipwreck. The first, exemplified by Robinson Crusoe, meets the emergency by personal adjustment and acceptance. The survivor of the disaster passes through a series of internal decisions and then settles down with resignation to meet the challenge of survival. In other words, he adapts himself to the circumstance in which he is placed. It appears impossible for a lone individual to create a new social system for others. In Insel Felsenburg, circumstances are set up which permit the development of a positive social concept. The survivors take an active and aggressive role. They impose their own patterns upon their environment and emerge as victors over the challenge of nature. They demand the natural heritage of their kind and assert the supremacy of mind over matter. The most advanced and highly specialized of the Robinsonaden was Insel Felsenburg, published by Johann Gottfried Stabel in 4 volumes between the years 1731 and 1743. Stabel's book, which originally appeared under the title which appears on your screen, is the story of the wonderful fate of a seafarer who was wrecked on the island of Felsenburg. This work, which is little known to English readers, unfolds the social implications of humanism with all the ponderous machinery of detail so native to the German mind. The springboard of Insel Felsenburg is the familiar story of the shipwreck. The hero Albertus Julius, seeking a new home to escape the confusion of the 30 Years' War, was cast away on the island of Felsenburg, where he established an ideal state. Whereas most of the other Robinsonaden are rooted in the psychology of the 17th century, Insel Felsenburg expounds the moving tenets of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, including the rebellion against civilization and the dynamic desire to return to a natural way of life. The shipwreck stands 4 persons on the island of Felsenburg. These are Albertus Julius, a French aristocrat by the name of Lemilai, and a young married couple, M. von Leuven, and Concordia, his wife, in a cave among the rocks of the island. These 4 come upon a human skeleton. With it is an autobiography of an unhappy victim of a previous shipwreck. From this writing, the 4 survivors gain a valuable knowledge of living conditions on the island. Of course, the skeleton and the record found with it signify tradition and the experiences of the past upon which the new social order must be built. So fertile is the land that material necessities present no problem, and, with the exception of the human equation, life unfolds towards a paradisiacal state. Albertus, Von Leuven, and Concordia are dominated by the new cultural concept, and are compelled to a higher standard of human dignity and relation. Limeli, however, who comes from an old noble family, personifies the Renaissance pattern of condition, and attempts to set himself up as the sole dictator of the island. The feuding that follows. Limeli kills Von Leuven in an effort to gain Concordia for himself. In order to protect Concordia, Albertus, in turn, slays Limeli. The descendants of Albertus and Concordia become the citizens of the little state of Felsenburg. The social development of the group rests solely upon the foundation of behavior, and the members are carried along towards the solution of their problems by this communal consciousness. It has been said that Insel Felsenburg should be included in the group of so-called anarchistic utopia. If so, this is a purely cultural anarchy with very few political factors. According to Fritz Bergman, cultural utopias develop at the end of a cultural epoch, which has grown old and worn out and, therefore, induces us to look longingly to the future. While intrigue, treason, power, and force used for egocentric purposes were the keynotes of the Renaissance man, the 18th century developed an entire new group of social and cultural values which tended to universal brotherhood. This new pattern of human tendencies is the conduct of Schnabel's utopian message. Moralities are clarified, marriage is placed on the foundation of love and fidelity, and genuine emotions of piety and brotherly affection distinguish the ideal. There is a curious spirit of mistrust, however, running through the entire story. This is first personified by Limeli, and it is later intensified in the attitude of Concordia and Albertus towards the world outside of their island. Their resolution to remain is not based entirely upon the integrity of their own social experiment. They are afraid of the outside world with its intrigue and deceit. In substance, there is a strong factor of escapism. They would never have attempted to escape from their island or ever considered such a move, had it not been that they needed to secure mates for their children. Insel Felsenburg should not be regarded merely as a haven for those political refugees of the mind who are seeking to escape the tyranny of corrupt political institutions. Rather, the emphasis is upon a much higher level. They are searching for a simple, honorable way of life, where they can live according to virtue, peace, and harmony. Their practical adversary is the immorality of masses and privileged classes. The search is for an idealization of personal relationships. Early editions of Insel Felsenburg contain a map of the island. From this, it is evident that a representation of the human brain is intended. As a compass point should normally be directed to the north, the map must be inverted. When this is done, the internal construction of the brain becomes evident. The utopian scheme is an escape towards an intellectual life, an adventure in the world of mind. This island of Felsenburg exists primarily as an experience of thought, and the brain symbol becomes entirely appropriate to represent the physical empire of the thinker. A comparison of this map with the earlier engraving which occurs in the first edition of Moore's Utopia shows clearly that both islands are cranial in form and are identical in meaning. The philosophic empire of the Platonist and Neoplatonist was an ever-existing state of consciousness to which man must ascend by the circuitous route of self-discipline. The dimensions and proportions of the ideal world were already established and must be accepted or rejected, never modified or changed. The journey to the utopia was inward, towards the self, and the end to be attained was an experience of conscious identification with the universal plan. When we compare Andre's ground plan of the fabulous city of Christianopolis with a Tibetan Buddhist symbolic painting of the Western paradise of Amitabha, immediately it becomes evident that the city four square, described in the vision of St. John, the mountain Meru, the home of the gods in the Brahmic theology, the heavenly city of Asgard, where the Nordic All-Father held court, and the mystic shrine of the Knights of the Holy Grail at Mount Salvat are all one and the same. The Blessed Isles of the West, the Gobina, the sacred island in the sand ocean of Shamo, the lost islands of the Atlantides. Each represents overstates to which the human being must obtain by the ritualistic journey and wreckship. Such a mystical concept, however, was contrary to every instinct of the 18th century humanist. Without the spiritual anchorage of ancient concepts, they become wanderers in an intellectual world, recognizing no source of salvation except the passing security that they could build with their own energy and ingenuity, having no realization of an interior life to be attained by mystical apperceptive faculties. They directed their mental energies towards the creation of a heavenly state in the physical world. Strasbourg, 1619. An ideal representation of the Republic of Christianopolis. Man, unconscious of the universal edict which demands self-mastery, settles down to the intensively modern program of making himself ruler over his physical environment. But there is a minor chord of pathos in all the Robinsonaden. The human being cannot be the supreme autocrat over time, place, and condition. All that he builds is swept away by the currents of universal time. He must be eternally vigilant, ever on the defensive, and always in the presence of ultimate disaster. He cannot escape the pressure of the human collective. Someday strange ships will reach his desert isle. His magnificent experiment will crumble away and its ruins be absorbed into the great stream of human motion. At first the castaway longs for the coming of ships. Later he lives in constant fear of the appearance of distant sails. He is a mental creature, and in his small security, he wonders what is happening in the larger outside world from which he came. There is a rocky island in the midst of the sea. If a man is exiled to that island, his loneliness is punishment. If he chooses the island, then he interprets his aloneness as peace. But in either case, he is a man on a rock, looking out across a waste of waters. When a world fears a man, it may exile him. When a man fears his world, he may exile himself. The materialist always discovers in the end that his journey leads him to some lonely rock from which he must look out towards space and the stars. It is only the truly wise man whose adventure of living brings him back at last to that far country which is his real home. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Rosies. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.